Well, we began the year in January when I got diagnosed with cancer. I was going to take an 8-week medical leave of absence. Y'all were going to hold down the fort for me, and I was going to come back in. What did you guys do? Whole world fell apart, for crying out loud. The same day that I went in for surgery was the day that the whole state was shut down. And by the way, I got a clean bill of health. The surgery was very successful. Sometimes with this situation, people have to have radiation or chemo afterwards, but with me, they got it. So they were like, yeah, you're clean, which was really good to hear. So we kind of emerged in it. It was a long, slow recovery. It took a long time. You know, I was getting up, and for a while, my days consisted of, well, I sat on the couch yesterday, so to make it exciting, I'll sit on the chair today. So I'd mix it up a little bit, you know, to make life adventurous. It took a couple of weeks of that to finally able to walk around the park and do some things like that. And now I'm back to pretty much normal. It'll be a while before I'm 100%, but I can lift things, carry things, do what I need to do. Yeah, thank you. Yes, it's been a while. So it was crazy to come back and thinking like, well, then I was going to come back into this normal flow and make things work. And I was so excited because I kind of felt like we had this worship going. We had this teaching team that had kind of emerged. And I was so excited that we're going to have this really cool, fun, exciting church adventure when I come back. And then, of course, all of the world changed. While I was down, it was crazy. The COVID-19 hit. And all that change that would happen with that and continued change that would go on. And then right in the middle of it, it seems like it's the middle. It could be the very front edge for all we know. But you had these incidents that took place with Ahmaud Arbery being shot while jogging. And then you had Breonna Taylor, who with a no-knock warrant was shot and killed by the police officers in Kentucky. And then, of course, we all are completely familiar with the George Floyd incident in Minneapolis. And I think at such a time when the nation was on a semi-lockdown, more people were focused in and paying attention. And of course, the world began to break open. And either all heaven or all hell broke loose. And maybe a little bit of both. Maybe a little bit of both was going on. It's kind of interesting. I was invited to speak at the Academy of Arts and Sciences in Boston, Massachusetts, back in Cambridge in February. And it was about our church. Maybe sometime God will release me to kind of talk about what I did. But I went back there, flew back there, and this particular session was on American democracy. And they had united folks from all over America to talk about democracy in America and how it's working. And there was this universal theme that democracy isn't broken, but it's hurting. And in America, one of the things that they had talked about was the fact that as they searched to spend a 2-year research going around America discussing our democracy and how it's working, what was interesting is they said they had already tapped into, there's this underlying hopelessness and underlying anger and underlying frustration across the board from all parties. And they said what had happened is that this two-party system had broken America. And most of the people they talked to said, I don't really fit either party. I'm forced to identify with one or the other. But in truth, I don't really like either. And this frustration and angst, this underlying hurt is there. This underlying frustration is there. It was already at work in America before COVID and racial unrest broke it open. It was already at work. People were already studying this. And 2 weeks ago, they had a Zoom meeting to talk about this plan that they've come up with. There's 31 things that they think should be adopted to help kind of bring our democracy back into a little more of what was originally intended. Some of the things I'd agreed with, some I didn't. But what was interesting is during this Zoom meeting that I was on, one of the speakers for it was... I could grab my glasses really quick to see what his name was. It was David Brooks. He's a columnist for the New York Times. And when he was speaking in this session, one of the things he said is that looking back, about every 60 years, America goes through some massive social upheaval where the institutions and the ways of doing things, the things that are normal, suddenly are, there's a breaking open of those things. And usually what happens is in the course of that change, the ship gets righted again. And he said the last major social upheaval was like between 1968 and 1972. Right in there was the last major one. So he kind of took it, all this unrest that's happening now. He's like, we're due. We're due. It's been the 60-year cycle when America's institutions need to be sort of broken and reformulated. But the ship gets righted. And this has been our pattern for 200 plus years. The ship gets righted as we suddenly realize the way we've been doing things won't work anymore. And it's kind of interesting because you have this whole thing of most people right now, I think, are feeling unrest. They're feeling a little bit fearful. They're feeling a little bit like, I don't know. One of the big things you're watching is there's this growing distrust of government. Here in Spokane, following on Facebook, there's this team of people called Reopen Spokane, and they're on Facebook, and you can tell that there's this underlying, unrest with how the government is working for the people. We the people it's being lost. And so it's just been kind of this crazy sense. I don't know how you're feeling about things. It's when crazy left-wingers are taking over neighborhoods in Seattle with guns, private guns that are taking over. And we're trying and I'm sitting there reading and saying, hey, wait a minute. That's supposed to be the right wing who takes over with the guns. Wait, how'd the left wing end up? And I don't know if you're doing the same thing as kind of looking at, y'all should probably get together and talk, right? It's sort of this weird, crazy, what is happening? And what's happening is the unrest and the frustration that has been in the American population for some time is finally boiling to the surface. Is God in control? Absolutely. Does God maybe want to break some hell open so that some heaven can be unleashed? Probably. Right? Is that what usually it takes? It was interesting. I was discussing, I was talking to our superintendent of our conference here in our denomination, and he was discussing the fact that there's these kairos moments. And I don't know if I've got the slide for the term kairos. Yeah, kairos, it's an old Greek word, but actually if you look up in Merriam-Webster, a kairos moment is a time when conditions are right for the accomplishment of a crucial action, the opportune and decisive moment. So sometimes it can be an individual, sometimes it can be a whole society. But he was speaking of the fact that he thinks we're right now in a kairos moment. The nation is in a kairos moment. It's an opportune time to accomplish some crucial action. It is a decisive moment. And he said this interesting thing. He said, kairos moments magnify, clarify, and accelerate things. They magnify problems. In a kairos moment, stuff that's wrong gets magnified. It might have always been there, but it wasn't noticed, and problems and frustrations get magnified. If you've been on lockdown in a home for the most part with just one other person for a long time, the problems you may be having in that home get magnified, right? And that kind of thing, all this stuff. But the other thing that happens is problems are magnified and issues are magnified and things that are emerging, there's also things get clarified. And what begins to happen is the discussions begin to take place. And I think what a lot of people have done in this moment is starting to clarify, what is really important to me in my life? If you remove my ability to go out socially and just mix with people and, kind of, especially if you're an extrovert, just live life kind of bouncing around from event to event or club to club or whatever, and suddenly I have to boil it down and that's taken away from me, what really matters? And you see that relationships start to mean more than they ever did. When relationships get removed from you, suddenly they mean more. And they clarify, what is it that I really value? What is special to me? What is it that if I lost everything, I'd still say, but I got this, and that's the most important piece. For many people, that's family. We lost our ability to assemble as a church. And you begin to think through, what is it I really love about assembling with people to worship? It's not really the room, it's not the space. There's something that I'm missing in the act of corporate worship that I just couldn't get at home. What is being clarified? And then, of course, he said the third thing a kairos moment does is it accelerates. Meaning that when change happens, it happens faster and quicker because there's a larger sense of after the problem's been magnified and my values have been clarified, I'm willing to make the change quick. And so things accelerate. He goes, we're living as a nation in a kairos moment. Sometimes I think we look at Jesus and we think that when Jesus came and he walked on the earth and he walked into Jerusalem and he came, that pretty much it was a stabilized society that he was moving in and he was a bit of a disruptor. But historically speaking, actually, he was walking into a pretty destabilized moment. In fact, the scriptures say that he came in the fullness of times. It meant that stuff had boiled down to these kairos moment when Jesus came upon the earth and he moved. It was a kairos moment in time. He came at a time when there was really one super world power that was oppressing every people group almost in the planet. right? And certainly all over Europe, all over Africa, and all over the Middle East. One city was ruling it all with an oppressive regime, Rome, making people do what they want to do, oppressing them, making them pay taxes, and they were brutal about it, willing to stomp and destroy and kill anyone who tried to rise up against them. Within Jerusalem, where Jesus went, there were two conflicting parties who had the power. Underneath that oppressive government, there were Pharisees and Sadducees. There was the left wing and the right wing. And they were conflicting and battling each other. And they only united to sometimes deal with outside problems that they both agreed were things that would disrupt their control, their power, their system. Jesus was one of those. He was the disruptor of their two-party system. When Jesus came, there had been riots and uprising and violence. Actually, it's not really recorded in the scriptures, but when you look at outside historical documents, several uprisings had taken place right around the time Jesus emerges. Other men had come along claiming to be Messiah. Several of them had led these huge revolts. One of them had a whole bunch of people go out with them into the desert. They were assembling an army, about 6,000 of them, and the Romans came in and slaughtered them all. So you had this unrest that was happening. People were ready to follow someone new, because the anger, the unrest, the frustration in society had rippled through and everybody was feeling it. And the anger was so great, the frustration was so great, that within a generation of Jesus' time, the people who knew and met Jesus, their entire nation would fall apart and be destroyed by Rome. That's how powerful the unrest was. We've been speaking last week, Annetta talked about Jesus and the triumphal entry. And she was mentioning as Jesus came into the city, there were these people who saw him as the celebrity. They were people who celebrated Jesus, but they weren't followers of Jesus. They were people who were looking for Jesus to fulfill their own expectation. But they actually weren't listeners of Jesus' teaching and obedient to what he had to say to do. They were celebrating who he was. And the moment Jesus no longer met their expectations, they were no longer willing to follow him. I'm going to pick up a text in John chapter 12, right after the triumphal entry, and see something that Jesus said, which I think is kind of fascinating. It's powerful. It's part of the last public words he will give when he's in Jerusalem and he's talking to the crowd. In this moment in John, it's the last public words he's going to give. The rest of the Gospel of John is private stuff he says to his disciples. And in John chapter 12, verse 20, we're going to pick up and see what Jesus says in his Kairos moment. It says, "Now there were certain Greeks among those who came up to worship at the feast. And then they came up to Philip, who was from Bethsaida of Galilee, and they asked him, saying, 'Sir, we wish to see Jesus.' Philip came and told Andrew, and in turn, Andrew and Philip told Jesus." Okay, let's just pause for a second. So here's Jesus, who's had this massive Jewish following. He's following Jewish scriptures. He's talking Jewish doctrine. He's doing miracles amongst the Jewish people. There were a couple of miracles that were done for a Samaritan woman, one for a Roman centurion's servant, that kind of thing. But by and large, he's staying Jewish. And suddenly these Greeks are coming on, these total outsiders. Jesus' reputation has blown up so big that now Greeks are coming to see him. That would be a whole different ethnic, a whole different people group, a whole different social group. And they're coming and they're seeing Jesus, and I don't know, maybe they're people who are coming to the festival at Passover, they're God-fearers who are trying to investigate. But typically, the fact that John mentions them as Greeks and not God-fearers meant, no, these guys were not trying to be the monotheistic followers of our God. They were these philosophers looking to discover truth. And they were searching, who is this Jesus? He's got some sort of truth, and they were looking for him. Maybe they'd seen him in the court of the Gentiles driving out the money changers and the people who were selling the goats. Maybe they'd watched that and said, okay, this guy, something's different about this guy. They come to Philip because he's one of the apostles. He actually has a Greek name. And they're like, he doesn't have a Jewish name, so maybe he's a guy we could relate to. He's from Bethsaida, the text says. And Bethsaida was a super cosmopolitan, multicultural kind of town. So they're like, it's so against the rules for these Greek guys to talk to a Jewish rabbi that what they've got to do first is they go first, and socially it would be against the rules. So what they do is they go to the one guy. He's like, well, he's from a cosmopolitan city. He's got a Greek name. Maybe he'll listen to us. So they go to Philip. Philip's like, God, some Greeks, some complete polytheistic philosophers want to meet Jesus. I don't really know if I can introduce Jesus to you. I don't know if he would accept you. I don't know. He's not sure the rules are being broken here. And so he goes to Andrew, and they begin to talk about it, and they approach Jesus about, hey, these guys want to see you who aren't normal. And then Jesus gives this fascinating answer that, sometimes I read the text and it's like a non-answer. Sometimes it's a great answer. It says this, verse 23 through 26, it says, "But Jesus answered them, saying, the hour has come that the Son of Man should be glorified. Most assuredly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the ground and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it produces much grain. He who loves his life will lose it, and he who hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life. If anyone serves me, let him follow me, and where I am, there my servant will be also. If anyone serves me, him my Father will honor." Jesus begins the statement with, hey, not only is Jesus so popular, he's even reaching the Greeks now. These polytheistic philosophers who are coming out of Athens and stuff, he's reaching them. Wow, the moment is huge. And so when Jesus begins his statement, he says something very expected to his Jewish listeners. He says, now the hour has come that the Son of Man should be glorified. And everybody's like, yeah, I totally get that. And then he's going to switch gears on them and say something totally unexpected. When they heard the term Son of Man, it meant something in their time. The term Son of Man is all throughout the Old Testament, and they all knew their Old Testament. The Son of Man, actually, initially, when you read the Old Testament, it starts as a term meaning general mankind, descendants of Adam. A Son of Man is referred to throughout the Old Testament. It just means a human being, a representative kind of human being. You're a Son of Man, you're a human being, right? That's how the term is used. And then you get to about the time of Daniel and Ezekiel, when the Babylonian captivity had happened, the temple had been destroyed, and the term starts to shift gears. And it begins with Daniel. They're living at the same time. Daniel and Ezekiel were two prophets who lived at exactly the same time. One was high up in the courts of the Babylonian Empire, and one was down with the captured slaves of the Jewish people. But they're both prophesying at the same time. And Ezekiel uses the term 93 times in his prophecy, and 93 times it's God talking to Ezekiel saying, Son of Man, do this, Son of Man, do that. It meant you are the representative man of my people now. And when Daniel used the term, it was very different. In Daniel 7, he sees this vision, and in the vision, Daniel sees these four beasts that arise. And these four beasts are, there's the lion that has wings, and there's a bear with three ribs in its mouth. There's this leopard with 4 wings and 4 heads. And then he sees this great and terrible beast at the end that stomps and tramps on everything. And in his vision, he says they're like this. It was kind of like that. So his vision wasn't exactly a bear. It was like, well, the closest thing I could call it would be a bear. But they're like these monsters. And these hideous monsters come, and they're destructive on the earth. And God will reveal to him that those are kingdoms which are going to arise or which have come. He reveals to him, what you're seeing are these bestial monsters. And the monsters are these world global powers. And the one that was in his time at that moment was the lion with the eagle. That was the Babylonian Empire. And as he watches in his vision, the lion is stood upright until it stands on his feet like a man and is given the heart of a man. Something changed in the Babylonian kingdom, right? And then he sees the bear emerge, and the bear would be the Persians and the Medes. And what would arise after that would be the Greek Empire, Alexander the Great, a leopard that moved very fast, and it had 4 wings and it had 4 leopard's heads. And when Alexander the Great died, he didn't have any offspring, so no one could take over the throne. So they split the world that he had conquered into 4 parts. And 4 generals took each part. One took Europe, one took Middle East, one took Egypt, and one took further out in the Persian area. So that was that empire. And then he said after that he would see this huge, terrible beast that devoured and tromped the world. Now Daniel's living about roughly 500 to 600 BC. Rome won't arise till around the year, in power, around the year 200 BC. But what he sees is this horrific beast that tramples and stomps and destroys the world. And at the end of his vision, he says, I was watching. He says in Daniel 7, verse 13, I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. Then to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom. I think I got another picture maybe, Annetta. That all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion. which shall not pass away, and his kingdom the one which shall not be destroyed. So when Daniel sees these visions, the first four kingdoms are bestial. They're ravaging monsters. And he says at the end of the time, when these ravaging monsters have ravaged the world and destroyed it, there will come a new kingdom, but this one's an intelligent, man-represented kingdom. And he says, I saw one like the Son of Man come. And he was given a kingdom, an everlasting one. One day a kingdom would come which would be rational and intelligent and just and fair and peaceful. It would be all the things that man represents that beasts do not. And so the title Son of Man, in the time between the Old Testament and the New Testament, the title Son of Man kept growing and growing, taking on new terms. The Son of Man was seen as a religious political figure who would arise with power, overthrow all the other world orders. He would destroy evil and rule the world and reign the whole earth with justice, peace, and righteousness. The Son of Man was this Messiah who would come and make the world totally right. And they were expecting this one to come. They didn't know when he would come. They weren't sure who he would be. But they knew that when he came, basically he would be this political power which would set up a dominion to rule the world with intelligence, fairness, justice, and peace and righteousness, a dominion that would never end. You know that Jesus' favorite title for himself throughout the Gospels, the thing Jesus called himself more than anything? Son of Man. That was his favorite title for himself. And so when Jesus begins it, he says, the hour has come that the Son of Man should be glorified. All of his listeners are like, yeah, baby, we know what that means. You're going to set up a kingdom here. You're going to rule in Jerusalem. You're going to overthrow the Roman Empire. We're going to dominate the world. You're going to make everything right again. You're going to relieve oppression. You're going to make things fair. You'll bring down the mighty and raise up the lowly. The court systems will absolutely be fair and just. There will be no injustice. They were ready for this massive move, and they were willing to fight to get it. And that's how they were acting. When the Son of Man comes, it's going to be glorious. Many times I've thought through how often in history that people who have followed Jesus would look for the second coming to be this glorious, wonderful time, right? And this incredible, and it will be, when Jesus comes upon the second coming, there will be all of these things fulfilled that Daniel saw and the prophets saw. But I sometimes wonder if we really do want to celebrate that. I mean, I wonder what southern slave owners thought in their time if they hoped Jesus would return. You think that would have been a good coming when Jesus arrived? What about America in the 1930s, a Jim Crow, racially divided America? Going to church, singing songs, worshiping, hoping Jesus comes back soon. And there's a part of me that thinks, I don't think when Jesus comes back, you're going to get what you're expecting. Right? I think you're going to be a bit surprised when the Lord of righteousness comes back and he sets the world right. I think you're going to be a little bit surprised about who's in what camp. I wonder what we're blind to in our time. If every generation and every time had a blind spot, looking for the day when the glorious Son of Man would return, I wonder in our time, is there stuff we're blind to? Is there stuff that we'd come back and I'd be a bit surprised. When Jesus said, be glorified, the Son of Man must be glorified, everybody was ready for that geopolitical kingdom. And instead, he needed to first establish an internal, powerful, spiritual, emotional kingdom in the heart of individuals. The spiritual kingdom needed to come first in the heart of people, long before there could ever be such a thing as a righteous geopolitical kingdom. And so Jesus comes to establish something different. So the next phrase he says should be completely baffling to his listeners. Now the Son of Man has come to be glorified, and here's how it's going to go down. It's going to be through death. It's like, whoa, that's not how it works. It's supposed to work by power and glory. It's not supposed to work by humiliation and death. It's supposed to work by conquering victorious ways, not through humbling, losing ways. But look what Jesus says. He says, most assuredly I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the ground and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it produces much grain. That's actually a universal truth he's saying. He's starting by saying, look, how do things actually work in the world? How does it really work? And he says, anything you want to see a great increase on has to first die. And of course, they're all agricultural people. They get it more than any of us. They understand that if you've got a sack of grain sitting on your shelf back at your house, those individual kernels of grain, you could grind them up and make a loaf of bread, and you got one loaf of bread and you're done. If you want to increase the loaves of bread that sack of grain is worth, what you have to do is take each individual kernel, get out there and plant it in the ground till it dies. It becomes useless to make a loaf of bread at that moment. But if it dies in the ground, what will happen is many more sprouts will come up and many more kernels of grain will be produced. And now instead of a loaf of bread, you have tons of bread. Because that's how the world actually works. It works by death to the individual so that increase can come for the greater. And you know what? When you stop and think about it, that's true. How do you build friendships? You build friendships at some point when you sacrifice yourself for your friend's good. When you give up your time for the benefit of your friend. When you do things that are a hurt for you or a setback for you or a financial loss for you, that you actually take in stride to build the friendship. And you invest it in the friendship instead. You die to self to give it away. That increases friendship and relationship. Everybody who's married knows, unless you're willing to die to your own passions and desires and wants for what you want out of the marriage, you're never going to get the marriage you want. You have to first surrender to the other. You have to die to your own desires and wants and passions of the things that you want to have. And there's moments when you sacrifice those because you know your spouse needs something. You die to self so the spouse can increase something. And you know that if you do that, the marriage increases. And in the end, you actually get the relationship you wanted by first dying to self. The relationships that fall apart and break and end in divorce are the ones who refuse to die to self. If you refuse to die to your own passions and desires and claims and rights and justifications, you're never going to get the marriage you want. To get the marriage you want, you surrender to the other first. It's this universal principle. In relationships, in friendships, in marriages, in agriculture, Jesus is stating his universal principle that if you want the world to work, you have to first surrender yourself. Then there will be this massive increase. And then he says, he who loves his life will lose it. And he who hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life. He says, if you have goals and ambitions and dreams and desires that are yours, the only way you're actually going to see those come to true fruition is to surrender them and give them up to Jesus. And then he can redirect and do new things. In fact, if you look back at the great saints that are recorded in the scriptures, they all did that. I mean, Abraham called out of Ur of the Chaldeans, go into a land I will show you. Give up, and Ur was a mighty city. It was like the New York City of its time. It was the hub in the Sumerian culture, which was the dominant culture at the time. That was like, I want you to leave New York City and go to Iowa, right? And it's like, hey, wait, my ambitions, my dreams, my goals, my plans, everything I like about life, everything that happens in New York, why are you sending me to Iowa? Because I'm going to do something for you if you go to Iowa. Right? And so that's what Abraham does. Moses, he thinks he's going to be the deliverer because he was raised up in the court of Pharaoh, but that didn't work out so well. When he killed a guy, he flees into the desert. And he's gone, tried to do it his way, it didn't work. But once he's in the desert and he has his wife and he has his herds and goats, he's living amongst Jethro, he likes his life. And then God says, okay, give up this sheep herding goat life, this life that you have as a nomad with these people. I need you to go back to Egypt. He's like, I don't want to give this up. I'm happy here. He argues with God about going back to Egypt. You have to let go of this life to get the new thing I want to give you. And the new thing I want to give you is to be the deliverer of the people. Right? All throughout the Bible, you see that with the prophets losing and giving things up. You see it in the time of the judges, Gideon giving up what he had. He actually, the moment God calls him, sacrifices the oxen and the plow that he has so that he can go follow God to be a soldier, which he's never been. Once you sacrifice the oxen, you can't go back to being a farmer. You've gotten rid of everything. And he moves off to be a mighty warrior. The apostles drop their nets, leave their business to go follow Jesus. Over and over you see with the saints of faith, and then you could go through the history of time post-Bible, all throughout the history of the church in the last 2,000 years, and you can see the great saints are ones who gave something up, left their own ambition, their own lives, surrendered to God in order to become something special. Right? Once Mother Teresa was being interviewed, I think it was by Dan Rather, and he was talking to her about her life and what she did, working in the slums and the ghettos in Calcutta. And he says to her in the interview, he says, Mother Teresa, no offense, but I wouldn't do what you do for all the money in the world. And she shoots back, neither would I. Great answer, isn't it? All the money in the world, she wouldn't do it. She wasn't doing it for all the money in the world. She wasn't doing it for the glory. She had surrendered something of herself, given up the life that she could have had to surrender it to Jesus. And how is that multiplied? Well, let me tell you, she's a beloved saint. Right? There's a lot of rich people who've made their living and gotten rich, but they're not beloved. You think Bill Gates is beloved? In our society, is Bill Gates beloved? I would say no. Respected for being rich? Yeah. Hated for being rich? Absolutely. Beloved figure? No. Right? Jesus is saying, unless you get to a point in your spiritual life when you're willing to let go of your plans, your desires, your ambitions, your hopes, your dreams, and you're willing to take those in a whole bundle and hand them to Jesus and say, here they go. Here you go, Jesus. You keep the ones you want and kill the ones that don't matter to you. And I will trust you that if you lead my life a certain direction, what will emerge on the far side will be better. Something greater. And it isn't just right here that Jesus says this. He has said this before in his teaching. In Matthew, actually, chapter 20, verses 25 through 28, Jesus had called them to himself, and he said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who are great exercise authority over them. Yet it shall not be so among you. Whoever desires to become great among you, let him be your servant. Whoever desires to be the first among you, let him be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. It was a principle in his teaching over and over and over. You want to follow me? You give yourself up to become a servant to others, and therein will be the glory, the path to meaning, the path to purpose, the path to everything you really want out of life. One commentator, Barclay, he said, we have only to think what this world would have lost if there had not been men and women prepared to forget their personal safety, security, selfish gain, and selfish advancement. The world owes everything to people who recklessly spent their strength and gave themselves to God and to others. No doubt we will live longer if we take things easily, if we avoid all strain, if we sit at the fire and husband life, if we look after ourselves as a hypochondriac looks after his health. No doubt we will exist longer, but we will never have lived. I love this last thing Jesus says. It's actually a little bit, sometimes it's troubling. It definitely makes me think. When Jesus says in verse 26, if anyone serves me, let him follow me. And where I am, there my servant will be also. And I was thinking about that, and I'm like, that's really not how a lot of us in modern American Christianity think. You know what we like better? We like the verse that says, where two or three are gathered, there I am. Which means the onus is on me. I'm doing my thing. I'm in a certain spot, and I'm doing my thing my way. And there, I ask Jesus to come into my thing and bless it. Right? I'm going to gather. I'm going to have my thing that I'm going to do, and I'm going to ask Jesus to bless my thing. And it's usually the way we read the verse, the way we live the verse is, where I am, I call on Jesus and he shows up. That's kind of how we do it by default. And there's some truth to that. But Jesus says, actually the real way it works is, where I am, you need to come over and be where I am. You need to end up where I'm working. Where I am is where my servants end up. Right? And it's a subtle difference. It's a small difference. Sometimes we can't even tell the difference. The line is so fine between where I am, I want Jesus to show up, versus where Jesus is, I need to get over there and be with him. Where I am, my servants will be, he says. And sometimes, of course, the word servant is kind of weird, because for us, the term servant means you're some sort of hireling. That I'm the boss, I hire you, I pay you a wage, and then I tell you what to do. I give you orders, and you fulfill those orders, right? I mean, most of us, we think servant, the first word that comes to mind is like a butler or something, right? Downton Abbey, right? You're thinking in terms of those are what servants are. We don't have those in America, in middle-class America, right? And usually this image of a servant is you're just simply, I tell you what to do, and you go on your own strength and your own skill and your own power, and you go do it and accomplish the deed and then get back to me. But when Jesus speaks about servanthood, it's something different. When Jesus speaks about servanthood, it means that Jesus is saying, I'm already at work doing things. And if you come over where I am to do the things that I'm doing, I will not only tell you what to do, I will empower you to do it. Not your own skill, your own strength, your own intelligence, your own wherewithal. I will actually come and put myself in you. And so I'm already at work doing things. If you join with me, I will empower you to be my servant and do the things I want you to do. That's a different kind of thought. I couldn't help but think of, as I read through this, I couldn't help but think of that book that came out, I think in the early 90s, called Experiencing God. You know, it was a phenomenal book, and it actually just sort of was a rage for a long time. And I don't hear hardly anybody talk about it much anymore. But Blackaby wrote this book, Experiencing God. And one of the main features of the book was, if you want to find God's will for your life, if you want to have happiness and purpose and meaning, then you need to find out where God is moving and what is God doing nearby you, and then you go join him in his work. Which is different than, Lord, let me do my thing and you bless me. Or even, Lord, let me sit here until you reveal it to me. Right? It's like, no. The impetus on you, go discover where God is moving and then join him in his work. Blackaby says at one point, he says, God is a sovereign ruler of the universe. He is the one who is at work, and he alone has the right to take the initiative to begin a work. He does not ask us to dream our dreams for him and then ask him to bless our plans. He is already at work when he comes to us. His desire is to get us from where we are to where he is working. When God reveals to you where he is working, that becomes his invitation to join him. When God reveals his work to you, that is his timing for you to begin to respond to him. God is always at work around us all the time. Jesus would say many times when Jesus was, when they were having confrontations or conversations with either the Pharisees or even his own disciples, he would say, I do what I see the Father doing. What the Father's doing, the Father speaks, and I'm just kind of saying what the Father. He didn't go do his own thing. He saw what the Father was doing, and he joined in the Father. And he's saying the same thing for us. And the question I would have is, where is Jesus working now? If he's always at work, where is he working now? What is he doing right now? In big and small ways. What is Jesus doing in and around your life right now? Where is Jesus already at work with the people you already know? Where is Jesus already at work in places that are easy access for you to get to? Where is Jesus already doing a work in your life around you? And I think the question is, well, are you ready to go discover his work and join him in it, right? And it's not always the most obvious things. It's not like, well, right now, racial division's obvious, I should investigate that. It may have nothing to do with that. What God may call you to do may have something to do with domestic violence, or it may have to do with hungry children, or it might have to do with lonely people. It might have to do with invalid elders. It might have something to Jesus is at work doing all kinds of things. But I do know this about Jesus. He will not unite the work that you do with your own passions and desires and loves and longings. The things that really light your heart up are the places that God's going to actually have you do a work. And sometimes we don't know what lights our heart up because we haven't experienced enough. So God throws us into situations and says, I'm going to put you in a situation you've never been in before, and you're going to discover something, and your heart's going to get lit up until you find that that's really the work you always wanted to do. The question for us as Christians is, are you ready? Are you ready to be Christ's ambassador? Really? Do you know Jesus well enough that if you were thrown into a situation, you could speak on his behalf? I mean, isn't that what an ambassador does? We're told we're ambassadors for Christ, right? That's what you are as a Christian. Do you know him well enough that if you were thrown into a conversation, you could speak for him? And a lot of us is like, no. Okay, well then there's your starting point, right? Know Jesus well enough that if you're thrown into a situation, a conversation, whatever it may be, that you know Jesus well enough that you could speak for him as his ambassador. The other question is this: is your heart ready to do the work that God may call you to? Here's what I know about Jesus. He's a stabilizer who brings peace. Right? Is your heart ready to be a peacemaker? Are you a person who could go into a hostile or confrontational situation and you could carry the fragrance and the aroma and the aura of Christ in there to be a peacemaker? Sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not, right? Depends on the mood I'm in and what I say on Facebook. Some days I'm a great peacemaker. Other days I'm like, I shouldn't have said that. I should have stayed out of that one. Right? But Jesus' agents are peacemakers. And which is weird because right now that's not actually how our society is working. Our society is working through massive bullying efforts. Whether you're left or right, bullying is what we're using now to get done what we want. And so trying to walk into a situation to be a peacemaker, there's not even a place for it. One of the interesting things that came out of the conversation that the Academy of Arts and Sciences had about American democracy and what needs to change, one of the things they said is there's no longer any places where we are legitimately having conversations with people who don't agree with us. We don't know how to, we need to establish inside America, all over America, in tiny little pockets, places where conversation can be role modeled, where we can sit in the room with people who disagree with us and we can actually see what a conversation between them would look like. Because all we get now are adversarial, bantering, yelling, put down, disparaging attacks. And they said we've lost that in our democracy. We've lost the ability to reason with one another. Right? And so there's this thing of if we're going to be Jesus' representatives, we need to know him enough that we could be an ambassador who speaks for him, and we need to carry his heart, that we could be agents of peace where we go. One of the discussions I've had with several of my African American friends here in the Spokane area is the difference between what's happening in some of the racial unrest in America versus how it needs to happen in the churches. In America, it's adversarial, draw your line, which side are you on, and we'll make sure we attack you if you're on the opposite side of where we are. The goal in the church is reconciliation. Reconciliation is the goal. Harmony, bringing hearts back together again. Bringing people of different ethnicities and backgrounds and racial makeup into harmony and peace with one another, right? That's the goal, and it's harder work to do. Much harder work to do. So where is the Father at work in your life? Jesus said, where I am, my servants will be. Where is Jesus at work in your life, in your surroundings, in your relationships? As the band comes up, I want you to consider and think about the fact that he is at work. He hasn't changed. He's at work around us right now, all the time doing stuff. And he's saying to many of us, I want you involved. I've asked Brian, I said, there's a great song, Oh No, You Never Let Go. Through the calm and through the storm, you never let go. You never let go of me. And I said, Brian, I just think that's kind of a theme for where we are right now. Some of us are calm, some of us are in a storm. But the idea is that God is never letting go of you. And where you are and where he wants to take you are fantastic places, united with his Spirit, where change of reconciliation and hope and peace can happen because you're fit to be an ambassador who speaks for him in moments of crisis, in moments of pain, in moments of suffering, in moments of harm, in moments of joy and celebration. And God says, I want my servants to be where I am doing this.
Well, let's pray together. Jesus, Father, we just come to you and we thank you. We thank you for what you're doing. Boy, a lot of this change is hard, but Lord, we praise you for it. We praise you for the hard things that you're doing in our lives. We choose to thank you. We choose to thank you for the difficult stuff, because that difficult stuff is molding and shaping us into the people you want us to be. And Lord, just as Rob was saying, there are things that we need to let go of. Things that we've put too high of a value on. Jesus. Too high of a value. And we've placed those things higher than you, Lord. Ouch. Lord, those things that we have made idols before you. And I don't know what it is for anybody else, but we all have our own stuff. And so, Lord, we take right now whatever that thing is that comes to mind. And Lord, we lift it up to you and we put it at the foot of the cross. And we crucify it with you and we say, Lord, we let it go. We let that thing go. And we ask, Lord, that you would bring a healing in those places in us that are so broken, so broken that we think, I don't know how it's ever going to be fixed, how it'll ever be any better. But Lord, you work through those broken places in our lives. Those broken places are often what pushes us to you. And so, Lord, I thank you for those things, because they do push us to you. And so, Lord, as we go from this place, either here in the building or those who are joining online, as we go from where we are right now in this holy moment together, we are joined together in you. I thank you for that, Lord. And not only are we joined as the gathering house, but we are joined with our brothers and sisters all over the world. And Lord, all over the world, people are dealing with hard things and change. Lord, I ask that you give us the humility and the ability to listen to one another, to listen to those people that are being marginalized or on the fringes, people who are... Lord, we just need to learn to listen. Sometimes we need to be quiet so that somebody else can say things, so that we can see another perspective than our own. And that's a hard thing to do. So, Lord, I ask that you would give us extra grace to be those kind of people. Lord, I ask that you bless our fathers, all the fathers that are hearing this prayer today. Lord, I thank you for what they have done in the lives of their children. I thank you for the sacrifices they have made. I thank you for where they have aligned themselves to your image as Father, and that they have tried to be a good Father like you have been to us in so many ways. Lord, everything you have done for us is so far beyond what we begin to even deserve. Jesus, you paid a price so that we could live, so that we could be those ambassadors of your peace and of your love, of your kindness. Jesus, change us. Don't let us just push things under the rug, but help us to deal with our stuff in this time. Help us to remove those blinders. Help us to be for one another, to help us, not just to point out the bad stuff in some another, but point out the good stuff, but also to say, hey, I see this thing, I bet you're struggling with this, or maybe you don't even notice this is off. And Lord, help us to have the grace to be that for one another, to hold up a mirror and to realize that all of our mirrors that we hold up are cracked. Every mirror that we hold up is cracked. But Lord, you are the healer. You can heal us individually, you can heal us as a nation, and you can heal us as a world. And I thank you for however you go about doing that. We choose to trust you. We choose to thank you. We choose to honor you. In Jesus' name, amen.